Hello there. I'm Rose, and welcome to the Great Awakening Generator. Today I have with me astrologer Graham Ibell. Hello, Graham. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, nice to meet you and nice to be with you.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me. And I'm really feeling lucky today because we have the honor of having an astrologer on the Great Awakening Generator. We haven't had an astrologer before, so you're the first one, and
Okay.
I believe a very what's the word? The esteemed one. As in, like I've looked at your history and there's a lot of education behind it, and you're obviously serious about your astrology, and it's almost like whilst you've done other things, you've lived astrology.
Mm.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about you first before we talk about that. I'm jumping the gun here. So before we talk about the astrology, tell us a little bit about you.
Oh, okay. Well, I live in a little wee town called Paikakariki, which is just near Wellington. Um, and right from my desk right here, I have a nice view of the sea because I love the ocean. I swim every day in the sea throughout winter, so I've become quite hardened to cold water, which I really enjoy. And I find it's a useful um, aspect of kind of almost the hygiene of doing readings is after I finished a session, I often go for a swim. I quite
Ah,
like that.
that's
Yeah.
awesome.
I have four kids and and yeah, I have lived for a long time in New Zealand, but for a while I lived in England where I studied astrology. I went there in the 90s. Originally, I was a scientist with the Department of Conservation. I worked as a botanist there for a few years, doing sort of plant identification work. And then in the mid 90s, I became a bit disillusioned with science and discovered astrology through my girlfriend, my partner at the time. And so, yeah, we went traveling. I became very interested in a training in London and was lucky enough to be able to do it, even though it said it was only available for EC nationals. But somehow I managed to convince them. And it was sort of one of those destiny moments. I knew with all conviction that I would be able to do it, even though it was, not supposedly allowed. And somehow, when one is choosing when one is following a destiny moment, it seems as if life opens doors. So, one door opened after another, and within just a matter of months, we moved to Bristol, which is not so far from London. My wife was studying homeopathy, so she wanted to be near her studies in Devon, and so that was our chosen place to live. And then I would travel into London for the 4 years of the training that I did. Some may have heard of the astrologer Liz Green. She's written many books. She was the director of the college that I studied at, and
Okay.
my teacher and my main inspiration. Really, I enjoyed her work very much. She's written quite a few books. So that was the beginning for me, and ended up living in the UK after I finished my training and had
Okay.
family, and then came back to New Zealand in 2008. So I've lived here since then in 2008.
Okay. Yeah. What a history. And you started out being a botanist, right? You were
Yeah,
qualified to do botany, to be a botanist. What made you
yeah.
make the change? Oh, well, of course, you did say that you were interested in astrology, and of course, you met somebody and fell
Well,
in love with them, and I think
well,
they were
I wasn't at the time. I wasn't
okay.
really interested in astrology.
Okay.
I was strangely though, when I was 18 or something or 16, I'd bought a book. I was interested in the I Ching, a Chinese divination system called the I Ching,
Yes.
and I bought a book on I Ching and astrology, and I was really interested in programmable calculators, which were around in the 80s. And I remember programming the calculator to work out Chinese birth charts, which came out of this book. I didn't understand what I was doing because I was
Yeah.
still really young. I enjoyed the challenge of it, but it was almost as if something of my destiny was already showing itself, which I quickly put down and decided, no, that wasn't for me. And I didn't really think about astrology again until I met my wife to be. So,
Okay.
um, yeah.
All right. Wow. So I'm going to ask the question now that I know that you explained this on your website. What is astrology? I mean, I'm asking this question and it's a basic question. It's just right now we have a lot of astrologers and we are offered astrology, the astrology in terms of it's a full moon and what that means and how the planets are aligned and all of those things. But tell us what is astrology because we want to know the basics of it really because I think that sometimes because we get caught up in that narrative, we forget to ask that basic question.
Yeah, and it's a good question, and it's not one that I probably will give a very satisfactory answer to because it is quite a complicated question.
Yes.
I mean, simply described, it's really the charting or the study of the movement of the cosmos, and the projection of meaning into that, rather than just studying it objectively, which is what astronomers do, where they're just looking at it as if it exists randomly in its own right. Astrology does the same thing, but it then, through charting where the planets are, it then brings meaning to it and said that the meaning of these planets, sorry, the movement of these planets has a meaning for us on Earth.
Yes.
And notice I'm using the word meaning. I'm not using the word has impact on us or causes things to happen on Earth, because as an astrologer, I'm at great pains at trying to turn away from a causal idea around astrology, that the planets are causing things to happen on Earth, which is the mistake I think many astrologers unconsciously make, unwittingly make. But I think astrologers, all we can say really is that we're watching the stars and we're seeing that the movement of planets in the heavens corresponds to life on Earth,
Yes.
almost as if the planet's movements are like placeholders for archetypal themes that the Earth is subject to.
Okay.
So yeah, yeah. I hope that makes some sense.
It does. It does. Yeah, I have often wondered if perhaps when we believe so much in in it being the cause of things happening into our world, even for us personally or as a collective of people, um, that we, like you were saying earlier, before we went to record, we're not taking the responsibility for what's going on in our world, and also we're finding a reason other than ourselves, maybe, and when we collectively believe in something, we can create that reality. Even if you do it on your own, if you believe in something, you can create a reality. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
no, absolutely.
yes. So my next question was, what does an astrologer do? Do you want to add more to what you just told us?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are many different forms of astrologers, so I can talk a little bit about what I do, and
Yeah.
maybe I could add some things to what other astrologers may do. But generally, in the way that we understand astrologers now, they either teach astrology, which is something I do, or we interpret the horoscopes for clients.
Yes.
And normally they're personal clients. They're people who come for their own understanding of their own life journey, a sense of getting a deeper sense of who they are and why their life is unfolding in the way it is. So that's the personal aspect of the work that I do. And then there are some astrologers that might work for corporations or for larger groups. There's a whole branch of astrology called mundane astrology, which is more working at a political level for helping understand how the movement of the planets not only is something that the human being can gain from and can understand themselves better through knowing, but so too can groups of people or collectives, cultures. So there is a branch of astrology called mundane astrology, which I don't practice. I know a little bit about, but I don't practice. And they would have clients more in terms of maybe businesses might come to them and say, give us an idea of what is going to be the year ahead for our business. Or I don't think any nation in this day and age would do this, but if you go back 300 or 400 years, many nations would have had astrologers, many kingdoms, many royalty would use astrologers to help them understand the how to govern better, and what the needs of the country were, what the destiny of the country
Mm.
was. And so that's another use of astrology, which there are a handful of people probably still doing. Often things are beneath the radar.
Yeah.
We don't know about them because it's so um, controversial and unusual. But somebody like Ronald Reagan is quite well known as having used astrology
That's
considerably
right.
in
Yeah.
his time. Yeah,
Hmm.
there are many others. Francois Mitterrand, I think, in France used astrology.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, that's a different branch of astrology. But on the whole, an astrologer, um, most astrologers are like me. They would see individual clients who come either regularly or they come once to get a bit of a sense of what do the stars say about their destiny. Maybe that's
Yeah.
a simple
Yeah.
describing it.
Yeah. Wow.
But just to
Um,
be clear, that just sorry to interrupt, but just to
that's
be
okay.
clear, when I talk about destiny, I'm talking about it not as if it's something written in stone. I think there's a strange thing that astrology is one of the difficulties around explaining it is it's deeply mysterious, and when we try and describe it, when we try and put a box around it and say we've caught it, we can describe it now, it wiggles out. It defies definition in some ways. So it's quite hard to generalize about what we do. But when I talk about the word destiny, it isn't to imply that it's not to imply that it's completely fixed. Our personal birth chart, our star map might give us an idea of something of our destiny, but there's still a relative amount of negotiation that can take place. It's
Yeah.
almost as if destiny is more plastic than we think.
Yeah.
And in fact, I believe that our collective role as humans in this kind of age that we're in is to become more free, and therefore not to blame our stars, so to speak, and say, I am like this because of my stars, but actually to use it as a way of knowing ourselves and then lifting ourselves out of it. Not to
Mm.
say that we transcend our horoscope, but that we can look for different and more conscious and more healthy ways of expressing the destiny that we've been given. So
Mm.
there's always this interplay between freedom, the freedom of the individual
Yeah.
to be themselves,
Yeah.
but also the limitations that their chart also gives them.
Yeah.
So yeah, an interesting and subtle interplay between the two of them. And what I believe the astrologer does is help every individual towards that path of liberation, of giving them different strategies and ways of living themselves in a way that brings choice, that brings
Mm.
happiness because there is choice, rather than the
Yeah.
fact that we are a chain to the destiny of our horoscope.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's interesting, and you're right about it being subtle. My first brush with astrology was from the time, well, when Indian children are born, the parents or grandparents go to the priest, and
Mm,
they give him the details of the birth of the child, like the time, um, the day, and
the play.
well, and the date, of course, right? And the place, yes. And so he then looks at his chart or the birth chart and it even gives the name out of that information. He might give
Mhm.
four names and the parents get to choose out of it. In recent times, the priest gives an alphabet. I don't know why that changed, but when I was born, it was the time of names. I was only given one name, and
Mhm.
my parents and grandparents went to two other priests because they thought the name was too difficult. They thought, well, this child's not going to have a good time with this name, and so they went to the other priests. And once it happened with the third priest, my grandmother said, well, it's happened in threes. It's going to have to stay. And so I've had my name, and so that's
Yes.
my experience with astrology. What I didn't know was that it was so amazing. It was quite popular in the Western world also, you know.
Mm.
And it's great to know that now that it's so coming to the forefront, and people are realizing that's another thing that you can actually use to live your life here on the planet, for guidance.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, totally, totally. It's great to hear that. I mean, I have a reasonable number of clients from India or from that part of the world because of their strong tradition. But the tradition is a little bit different, and the philosophy or the attitude behind it is a little bit different from Western astrology. So sometimes there is a little bit of an expectation crisis where their expectation from how I work, is not met. Sorry, I didn't explain that well. They expect something that I'm not able to deliver
Okay.
because of the experience that the Indian client often has of astrology, which is
Mm,
quite different
mm,
than in the West.
mm.
But yeah, it is exciting to see Western astrology become more popular, more accepted. I can't remember the proportion, but there's an extraordinarily large proportion of Americans that I read in an article that now follow astrology. It's something like 40% or
Yeah.
more, which was unheard of when I was first studying. So yeah,
Mm,
it's good. And without wanting to sound too negative, I also think there is a caveat. There is a potential downside on it, because when anything gets popular, particularly anything as subtle as astrology, and is open to misinterpretation and misuse, and as perceptive as astrology is, it can be miscommunicated. And so, given that we live in the age of the internet, there is a lot of astrology on the internet that isn't necessarily what a professional or a serious astrologer would see as being that helpful, or that good an expression of astrology. So
mm.
it comes with that problem that we've also got to be discerning. We have to be careful at who we listen to,
Yeah.
and yeah, fortunately, are a lot of good places to train in astrology now. Even some universities in certain parts of the world are having courses in it, which isn't always a good thing, because sometimes that becomes over academic. But I think it does represent that there are more and more people taking it seriously, and
Yes.
that's only a good thing. So
Mm.
yeah, exciting
Yeah.
time to be an astrologer, and I often say that to my students. This is a good time to, once upon a time you would have had to been quite brave to become an astrologer, maybe, go back 30, 40 years. But now I think there's real scope for astrologers to make a living,
Mm.
surprisingly, from
Yeah.
this work.
That's really good. That's good to hear, because I think more and more things that used to be are coming to be in present times. And astrology is one of them. I've got to just say about Eastern astrology, I don't know I'm not from India. I'm of Indian descent, but I'm not from India. And I don't know what their experience would be in terms of astrology, because I think perhaps astrology in India might be a little bit of maybe fortune telling too, as part of it. You know,
It,
so
I speak ignorantly because I haven't been to India, and it's no
mm,
doubt diverse like it is here. But there is a basic difference,
yeah.
um, in that most Indian astrologers use a different zodiac than we do.
Okay. Yes, they do. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
use what's called the sidereal zodiac, and most
yeah,
Westerns use the tropical zodiac.
yeah,
And that's not the only difference, but that starts to show how they have, actually very similar systems, but also based in some quite different premises. And
mm,
um, yeah, I find it fascinating that I get clients sometimes who have seen Jyotish or Vedic astrologers, and they have a huge amount of respect for them, and they get a huge amount from those readings. And then they go to a Western astrologer and they get something equally valid, but from a very different perspective. So it's
yeah,
quite curious. I find it really curious how these two different systems that in effect work with very different horoscopes still come up with information that's meaningful and useful.
yeah,
I like that.
yeah. I also found it fascinating recently that the calendar is different. Like, in Western astrology, we say Aries is the first sign of the 12 signs. And they actually say, I think it's Pisces is the first one. And I
Right.
and of course Pisces is not falling in the pattern of in the date range of where our Pisces, well, I say our as in Western Pisces date range.
Mhm.
It falls more into the Aries
Yeah.
um
So
date range,
yeah,
and I'm like,
that's
wow,
the
I'd be
difference.
Pisces if I was in that.
That's the difference between the two zodiacs, which
Yeah.
can be quite alarming when people hear this.
Oh yeah.
So it's one of those things that I think people have to do a little bit of scratching to understand. Otherwise, it can be quite destabilizing around confidence in astrology. But yeah, the zodiacs are separating. They're getting further and further apart. At the moment, they're almost a whole sign different, which is why, as you say, Aries can become Pisces.
Yeah.
Or Aries in one system is Pisces in another
Yeah.
system. So yeah, it's a difficult thing to explain quickly, and I'm not going to try. But I think all I'd say is that it does create, people can scratch their heads and think, wow, how can both these systems be right? And in the Western world, I'm an Aries, and in the Eastern world, I'm a Pisces. How can I reconcile that? Yeah, and that you do get fundamentalists, I guess, who would say, no, only this system is right, only the Western system right, or only the Eastern system is right. But I think it's good to see the richness in those two main two systems. They're both really valid.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm going to ask this now. We've been talking about astrology and all of that, but so why is astrology important for us? I mean, it's important. We know that, and we're seeing the value of it now. But why is it a fundamental thing that is it a fundamental thing we should have, and why is it important?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, the evidence is that it always has been important. It's been practiced for as long as human beings have really had culture. I mean, we've always looked to the stars to for practical reasons, and then increasingly for sort of political, and then more latterly psychological reasons, social reasons. So it's always, I think the evidence is that the human being always needs an orientation towards the cosmos, and religion has formed part of that, and so has astrology. And in fact, religion and astrology were probably inseparable, and therefore it's always been part of our cosmology and our worldview is to work through the the zodiac, or the stars and the planets. Myth has always involved star stories and heroes who come out of the planets, or who are aligned with the planets. So it's definitely, the evidence is that we do need astrology, and I think maybe we do now, particularly in this sort of post-religious world, in this increasingly secular world. I think astrologers are more and more carrying the thread of that kind of cosmic connection that we don't get now, because many of us don't have a religion that we feel aligned with.
Yeah.
Something I try and carefully communicate with my students, that we have to be aware of that people that come to us a little bit like we might have gone for confession, or a little bit like we might have gone to the priest for guidance. And that's not arrogance to presume that. I think it's dangerous not to presume that, and to think that we don't have to take that responsibility seriously. I think the training an astrologer needs is absolutely crucial, so that they can carry those kind of expectations and projections that we get from clients, that are because the secular world is failing them in some way. So I think we absolutely need astrology to be that bridge between the earth and the heaven, between the secular and the transcendent, which is what astrology, I think, really does beautifully, or can do beautifully.
Yeah.
So I think it's a fundamental human need, and astrology is more important than ever because of the absence of organized religion fulfilling that.
Wow, I really love what you said. I think that it's so true, and it's so absolutely on point with that, because yeah, it's such a unique thing you're doing. And when astrologers are that important, I'm not saying as in important as in it's ego or anything like that, but the message you're relaying is so important, because people are looking for guidance. And I mean, like I said, when I was born and they went looking for the name or whatever, they went to the priest. So the priest had that combination of the astrology, knowledge of astrology as well as being the priest. So that
Yeah.
makes so much sense that that it's connected, and yes, very important. Yeah, it's not like anything. It's not like going to a medium where you're taking guesses. You're actually having something to go to and say this is the alignment, for example, and that's where the guidance is coming from, right?
Yeah, well, it sometimes can look a bit like going to a medium, and
Mm,
certain astrologers might work like that. And I'm not disparaging mediums. I think they have their place. And but I think the important thing with all these practices is it's not only the content. We think it's about the content. We think it's because we go along because we want to contact our distant relation, or our mother who's just passed over, or we might go to the astrologer because we want to understand why we're going through such a troubled time in our relationship. And yes, the information we get is useful at a real practical and inner level. But I think what we're also doing, and this is the subtle thing that I think is important, is that we're also reminding the client that they are living in a world that is infused with meaning, and that life has a purpose, and that there is a connection with the divine at some level.
mm,
And all this is subtly communicated the through the astrologer working. It's just an implicit part of being an astrologer. That's what we're communicating,
mm,
not just the content, but that these so-called random bits of rock that are flying around the place
yeah.
are pointing to an intimate connection that we have with a meaningful cosmos. And
Mm,
I think in this day and age, when there's so much depression and alienation and isolation and disenchantment, I think the astrologer has such a crucial role in turning that back a little bit,
yeah.
which I think it's such an antidote for a lot of the malaise of our current crisis in the world,
Yeah.
is being reminded that we live in a meaningful cosmos. And astrologers are doing that just by doing their work, as well as
Yes.
the fact we are giving useful content.
Yes. Yes, indeed. So I noticed, and I was not aware of this before looking at your website, that there's so many types of astrology. And I thought one of my questions was going to be, why are there so many types of astrology? And I've just changed my mind about that because I think, well, there's so many facets to us here on this planet. So why wouldn't there be?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
so you focus, sorry, when I listened to the podcast that was on your website, it looks to me like you work as a psychological astrologer. So can you tell me what is a psychological astrologer?
yeah. I've often debated whether I need to change that, because I don't really like boxes, which is curious because I work as an astrologer that a lot of people think is all about putting people in boxes. But I don't like that. And yeah, partly I question it because I do other forms of astrology as well, but partly because in a way all astrology is psychological at
Yeah,
some level, or it could be in the
yeah,
right hand. Um, because it's all good at helping a person um, to more deeply know themselves. And when I say themselves, I'm not just meaning their inner life, but I think the individual, as strange as this is going to sound, finds themselves also in everyday life. So when an astrologer comes to ask about very practical questions, they are also finding out about themselves psychologically, because their inner life is projected out into the world. And so the
mm,
thing that happens when they have an accident is often something that really points to an important process inside them. So at the end of the day, an astrologer working very practically, I think, is also still helping a person to
yes,
understand them. But if I go back to the definition of psychological astrology, it would be normally that it's an astrology practiced in order to help a person understand themselves and understand their wholeness, the fact that they're made up of, one could say, multiple selves, or that they have many layers to themselves, that most of which are in the unconscious, or most of which are still they're still getting to know. Most of them are still in the shadows. So more and more I'm aware that what I enjoy and what I feel like I can do is use the chart to help a person um, in the process of whole making, in the process of becoming as whole as they can, which even then I don't like that description because I wonder whether we ever get there. And also, meaning, by the time we get to the end of this life, I do wonder whether we've ever achieved this notion of wholeness. But I still think the psychological astrologer is helping that process. They're helping
Right.
a person to understand why they trip themselves up over doing the same thing over and over again without realizing it. And astrology is remarkably incisive at helping to pinpoint patterns that might be repeating all the time because the person is still struggling to bring them into consciousness.
Yeah.
Or the chart can be amazing at looking at childhood patterns that have become so entrenched as stories that we don't even consciously tell ourselves, but they're
Mm.
stories that just um, manifest repeatedly in our life. It's so good at lifting those up and saying, bring them and helping them to bring to light, so the client can say, I understand why this is going on, and I can connect it now with that relationship I had with my mother and the attachment wound that came out of it. So even if that doesn't change their pattern straight away, I think it helps them to start making choices. So I think psychological astrology is really about trying to equip a client with greater knowledge of the wholeness of who they are and the complexity of who they are, so
Mm.
they can then start freeing themselves from more um, reflexive and automatic ways of behaving that are based on their patterns
Mm.
that start to run their life if they're not addressed or if they're not looked at. Um,
Mm.
so, but it's practiced at very many different levels, depending on the interest or the experience or the temperament of the client. Sorry, of the astrologer. For me, I've done quite a lot of psychotherapeutic and psychological training, so that helps as a sort of a side. It helps. I guess, deepen and broaden my astrology. But I think there are other astrologers who may not have that, but they still work psychologically in order to um, describe characters that an individual may or may not be aware of. Sort of the presence of these 10 different planets or more, sometimes people work with more planets, could be seen as um, a family of people that are having to live together in the individual, and the more characterological based astrologer they may still work psychologically. They're describing these different characters that live in this individual, and
Mm.
and that can be really helpful and very insightful for them,
Yeah.
so that they can then get on, help the family to get on, so to speak. I'm talking about the inner family here, of course,
Yes.
the inner
Yes.
family of the different characters that live within us.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, no, I was going to say, oh, well, what kind of situations arise that people might want a reading with an astrologer? But I mean, you've answered that. I think it's normally when something's happening in your world that you're
Yeah,
looking
although
for greater understanding of or deeper understanding of, right?
that's right. Although there are certain typical paths, and there are always exceptions to that. But I'd say 90% of clients come with three issues really. It's relationship, it's career, and it's health.
Yeah.
They're the three big ones.
Yeah.
Sometimes home as well.
Yeah.
I'd probably include that as well. So yeah, and often what brings a client into the door isn't necessarily what they then um, also need. Sometimes the chart that they may come in for something and hopefully they get that addressed by the astrologer, but sometimes it can also be that other things come out of it.
Yeah.
I think whilst an astrologer will often ask either at the beginning of the session or maybe before the session in an email exchange, they may ask, what are you wanting from this session? And of course, they'll address that as best they can, but they'll also be loyal to what the chart presents to them, um, and that may mean taking them off into a different direction than the client initially asked. And of course, that has practice and ethical issues. But on the whole, um, the astrologer will work with what they see as much as address the questions of the client.
Yes. Okay. I know that astrology is based on the birth chart. I mean, if you don't have a birth chart, well, everyone's got a birth chart. So, and that's the platform in which astrology operates from, together with all the that which is in the cosmos, the planets and the alignments of the planets and all of that, right? At the time of birth. Now,
Yeah.
I noticed that you have something called on your website birth time rectification. And I was curious about that because I thought, wow, okay. Because when a person doesn't know the time of birth, they normally put in what, 12 p.m. and it works like that, right? And I have sometimes gone into an online birth chart and put another time and looked at the alignments then, and you see a totally different outcome in terms of the rising and the moon sign and all of that. Tell me about the time rectification.
Sure. Yeah. No, good. It's as you pointed out, birth time is an important part of drawing up the chart. We can't understand, or we can't picture, we can't chart our orientation towards the heavens without the birth time. And I normally like to have it within 30 minutes, preferably less than that, but certainly within 30 minutes. And many clients, particularly in New Zealand, don't have that because it's not written down here. In some countries, it's recorded on the birth certificate.
Yeah.
But I understand even then, in places like most of the states in America where they record birth time, even then it's tricky because one doesn't quite know why they recorded that particular time. Was it when the birth actually happened, or was it when they were filling out the form at the end of the day? And so there is still question about even recorded birth times. So sometimes rectification can be a process of corroborating through events that a person has experienced in their life. Would these events concur with that birth chart? And as a way of confirming, yep, this birth chart works. That time seems to be an accurate time. But most often it's used with people who don't know their time, or don't know their time very accurately. And then what I'll ask them is to provide me with a whole lot of different dates that when things have happened. So I got married on this date. I had my first child on that date. My dad died on this date. I had a very strong spiritual experience on this date, or whatever. They'll list me 10, 12 different really important dates throughout their life. And then I'll go back and look at the chart and work out. It's almost a reverse engineering. It says that in order for these events to have happened, what houses and as you say, rising sign would this horoscope have to have in order for these events to have happened?
Okay.
So that's one way I work, but I think it's also important to use all sorts of other different testimonies for a birth chart. I do work with events, but also things like the rising sign often come across in a person's outward personality. So I always like to meet with a client when I'm rectifying their birth chart, and then I can get a sense of them. I get a sense of their energy, their face, the way they dress. I like handwriting because I think our personality and our presenting style comes across in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And I need lots of little bits of information that I can pull together to then say, this is the time that works best with what I experience of you and all those events that you've given me. And it's a long process. It's not quick, and it's quite an involved process for the client as well. Often it digs up a lot of memory because they have to go back to old ideas and old memories. But I think it's normally, well, I'd like to think it's normally fairly accurate because I don't quite a perfectionist, and I don't like to release times to the client until I feel really satisfied that this is actually the birth chart that works best given their information.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Very interesting. I want to so if anyone wanted to have a reading with you, and I looked at the website and it's awesome, and what you offer is great. Tell us where they can find find that information, please, if they wanted to reading?
Okay, so you mean like my website address?
Yes, I have it
Yeah, well,
here if you would prefer me to say it.
it's easy because it's just my name, grahamibell.com.
Yeah,
Um,
easy.
and that's ibell.com. And on my website, there is a tab, I think, for booking a reading.
Yes.
And on that, I have a calendar that's got my available appointments. So it makes it a bit easy for people to coordinate their own calendar with what
Mm,
I've got available.
yeah,
And I see clients online and also in person, which I really enjoy. I enjoy the face-to-face clients, particularly because there's something about the work that I think has a certain level of intimacy that I think works really well in the same space. But in this day and age, that doesn't always work for people. So a lot of my work now is on Zoom.
that's
Um,
right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And
And then
then,
I just need a bit of information before. I like to work with the chart for some time beforehand. I
okay,
construct the chart using programs. I used to do it all by hand, but it takes quite a lot of calculation. And like everything, we often sacrifice that when there's an easy option. And so now I draw it up on a computer. But I then prepare through, particularly if a client specified things that they want to look at in an email, then I'll study the horoscope with those in mind, and then we come together for an hour and a half reading. And then often it's followed up later on if they come back, if they want to come back, if they get something from the experience, they'll come back later to build on that. And it's particularly given that often, I mean, one of the, I think, most profound things that astrology offers a client is this understanding that nothing lasts forever, that even if you're going through a difficult experience, the movement of the planets symbolize change, and they symbolize a time frame at some level. So it can be a simple, but I think a profound thing for a client to hear, that this suffering will end, or this challenge will end, or um, you will resolve this, or there is a meaning behind it. And at the
yeah,
end of the day, you are going to be better as a result of this, or you are going to have found that job that you've been really struggling for, or you will overcome that particular struggle, or you can, maybe it's not will, you can. So anyway, I think um, that often is something that comes out of a chart reading experience, but then sometime down the track, the planets are moved in a different configuration. New things have come up, and a
mm,
person then comes back to explore those. So it's not really a one-off experience. I find it it's one of those things that I think is really good to build on through repeated readings.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I agree with that. Um, so you do workshops. I'm conscious of time, so we'll talk about your workshops. You do workshops from time to time, where you're teaching others to understand astrology. You
Yeah,
have something coming. You seem to be doing something almost every month, I think, in
yeah.
terms of teaching.
Yeah, I've got quite a busy teaching schedule now.
Mm,
It's got busier and busier, perhaps because of Zoom. I think it's meant because it's relatively niche, and I think still relatively niche. And New Zealand's a fairly small place. When I used to teach in person, face-to-face classes in classrooms, um, they were always quite small and quite marginal in terms of
mm,
their financial sustainability. But now people can zoom in from all over. So it's meant that I'm able to offer more and sometimes more specific themes. So I'm teaching a course at the moment on what's called astrocartography, which is a really interesting use of astrology based on um, exploring how our horoscope shifts according to where we are on the world, so that we can start understanding our relationship with physical space, physical place. So we can
mm.
look at what happens to our chart when we emigrate to a different country. And
Okay.
therefore, what is our relationship with that different part of the world? How do we experience ourselves when
Yeah.
we are on holiday in Fiji, for example? And the astrocartography is a way of exploring that. So I'm teaching a course in that. So some of my courses are for those more advanced students who have already quite a good grasp of astrology. but I also teach a basic course. I say basic, but it's not actually basic because I try to go into depth over a whole year, teaching people the fundamentals of astrology, going through the four, well, really it's the three main building blocks of astrology: the signs of the zodiac, the planets and the houses, and then looking also at things like the interrelationships with planets, trying to build over a year an astrologer that can read a horoscope, or at least start to. But you know,
Yeah.
the thing I always say to people, it's a big subject, and at the end of the year, you might know the language of astrology, but you might still not feel competent about speaking it, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, so it takes several years to, I think, to build that up. But by the end of the year, most clients, if they've and many clients, sorry, not clients, many students get really hooked on it, and they do a lot of their own personal research and personal study. And at the end, they often do have a really a good confidence in being able to look at a horoscope and start to make
Yeah.
interpretations. But it may be 3 or 4 more years before they feel like they can start seeing clients.
That's right. Wow. Okay. Right. So I'm looking to see, well, of course, your workshops are online as well. Information on the workshops are online as well. So if
Yeah,
anybody wanted
they're
to join a
online on.
workshop, yeah, they would
That's
be able
right.
to
Yeah.
register there. Hmm.
Yeah, and some of the other workshops I'm doing this year, I'm doing one on the I Ching, which is not astrology, I know,
Yeah.
but it's another passion of mine, and it's fact, as I said earlier, it predates my interest in astrology.
Yeah.
So I'll be teaching that in another workshop, and I'm doing another workshop on election astrology, which again is another slightly non-psychological branch of astrology, but it's the astrology that's perhaps one of the very early uses of it, when the astrologer would recommend a certain time to initiate something, so that the horoscope was as propitious, was as beneficial as possible.
Yeah.
So it's trying to encourage a person to start an initiative at an ideal time to maximize cosmic cooperation, so to speak. So I'm teaching that course, and I'm also doing a course looking at what we call the outer planets, Saturn, Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune, exploring those outer planets. So again, they're for more advanced students.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the basic course is starting next Thursday, so that's quite imminent.
Yeah. I saw that. Right. Graham, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Good,
Is
you're
there
very welcome.
anything else you thought you wanted to say to us before we say goodbye to you?
No, I think you've asked lovely questions. I've appreciated that, and great listening and responding. So no, I have nothing else further to add. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking with me. And yeah, we'll catch you next time. I'm
Good.
hoping. Well, everyone,
Oh,
thank you
you're
so
welcome.
much. Go on, sorry.
No, I was just saying you're very welcome. I've enjoyed it, and yeah, nice.
Me too. I have enjoyed it. Wonderful conversation. Well, everyone, thank you so much for watching. And yes, we'll catch you next time here on the Great Awakening Generator. Bye-bye.